Hey there, and welcome to Canyons Church Online. We're so glad that you're here. Whether you're watching from your couch or your kitchen or on the go, you're a part of our family, and we're grateful to share this time with you. Let's take the next few moments and grow in God's Word together. And remember, you're never alone. Reach out to us anytime. Thanks for joining us, and again, welcome to Canyons Church.
All right, welcome back, everybody, to our Swipe Right series. We're at the halfway point. We've got 2 Sundays left, and they are action-packed. And if you've been here for the first couple, you know what I mean. And if you haven't, then, man, you got some catching up to do. So, hey, leading into this morning, I have a confession I want to make to everybody, and that is I think quitting is awesome. All right, like for years, I thought that following through on absolutely everything that you started was like this cardinal virtue. But recently, I've learned the joys and the benefits of just hanging certain things up early. Now, get this one. All right, I think we've all been in this boat. You start watching a TV show. First season is okay. Second season is great. Third season is Fourth season is trash. But at this point, you think, I'm already 4 seasons deep. I have to finish this. I got to get all the way to the end. And I have something to tell you. No, you don't. You can quit that junk right now. You can just stop, and like nobody is going to know any better. Like, it's great. Now, maybe you, like me, grew up in a home where it was you have to finish all the food on your plate. Now, as an adult, I've learned you don't have to finish that burger and fries. You can walk away and not have heartburn later, right? Like, isn't it not amazing? So there are some things that just we don't even question. We're all okay with quitting. You know, like drugs, alcohol, abuse, right? Like just, you know what I'm talking about? Quit those things. Maybe you're part of a movement like that I'm trying to get myself like into where we start to quit on our phone addictions, where we're just not on our phones as much as we used to. By the way, is there any more like depressing moment of your week than when your iPhone tells you how many minutes a day you spent on your phone? And it almost always comes like right before the service starts. And I'm like, well, I got to confess something new today. So, so like some things we just know you can quit. But there's some things we don't want anybody to quit on. Take surgery, for instance. The last thing you want is your surgeon in the middle of the procedure to say, I'm a little hungry, I'm going to take a step away for a minute, right? Like you don't want that to happen. Telling a story is another one. Oh my gosh, I was in a conversation with somebody the other day. It was like a local dignitary, and he's like, hey, I was in a conversation with another person, and somebody that we would all know, and he's like, he did the dumbest thing possible. And what was my notes? All right, so marriage is another one. You just never quit on marriage, okay? Like you just never stop. So here's the thing. I'm convinced that marriage is actually one of those few things that really, without exception, like there's some exceptions, but for the most part, like it's something we should not give up on. But have you ever heard of the sunk cost fallacy? Have you guys ever heard of this? It's like here's the concept behind it. Is that after you've invested so much time and resources, you just feel like you could never walk away. So I don't know if you've been in this situation or if you can imagine this. Let's pretend you're flipping a house, okay? And you go to your contractor and you say, how much do we need to get this house like able to sell? And they're like, oh, we need $20,000. So you put $20,000 in, and then the contractor comes back and says, we discovered a big problem. And at this point, you have a choice. Do I sell it and maybe take a loss, or do I invest another $10,000 and maybe it'll all be fixed? So you're like, I've already put $20,000 in, so you put another 10, just to discover after the next 10, oh, something else came up. And so, once again, you're at that choice. You're like, well, I'm no longer just 20,000 in, I'm 30,000 in. I better just keep going. And what happens, you just keep putting money and time and money and time until eventually, if you just sold after the first problem, you would have been further ahead. But we don't do that. And why is that? It's because of the sunk cost fallacy. It's the reason why companies will throw lots of money after products that just aren't working, because they think, well, we've already put this much in, we better keep going. It's why people that you all know and love will keep doing the same strategies over and over and over, and it keeps producing the same broken results. Why? It's because of the sunk cost fallacy. There's this fear that if I walk away now, I'm so close to breakthrough when really you're not. And finally, you're just caught losing more than you would have ever gained. So, not getting caught in the sunk cost fallacy is great advice for dating. But it's a terrible way to manage a marriage. In fact, if you're dating a loser right now, you should drop him while I am talking, okay? I'm just going to tell you right now, pull your phone out, pin one of those Dear John texts. If you have to, tell him your pastor told you to, and be done with it, okay? But if you married that loser, let's talk about how we're going to make this work, okay? So what is the difference between the two? What is the difference between sticking it out with the person you're married to and walking away from the same exact person that you're dating? Well, in order to understand this, you need to know the theology of marriage. So in Genesis chapter 2, in the very beginning of beginnings, we actually see God officiate the very first marriage. And in fact, we talked about it a couple weeks ago, where it says God created them both, male and female, and he places them in the garden. And in fact, the story is God puts Adam to sleep. He takes out a rib. He creates woman. She wakes up. He's like, whoa, man, this is amazing. And he writes her a love song. And on the other side of the love song that he writes, the author of Genesis gives us some commentary so that we can better understand exactly what we read. And it actually says this: this explains why a man leaves his father and mother and is joined to his wife, and the two are united into, everybody say this together, one. Now the man and his wife were both naked, but they felt no shame. And there is, of course, a union of lives, but there's also some sexual undertones to this as well, that they are united, and they are naked and without shame. In fact, Jesus actually echoes these same exact words in Matthew 19, but he adds another part to the explanation. He says, since they are no longer two but one, let no one split apart what God has joined together. And for some of you, the dots were just connected. I heard that at my own wedding at the very end. Now I know where it came from, right? Like, let no one tear asunder. Okay, so what is the big deal here? The big deal is that marriage is God's idea. This is not a social construct. This isn't something that we as humans just kind of said, well, monogamy is kind of cool. Why don't we just sign a contract and make this official? No, this is something that God has instituted and God has put into place. And so when we talk about why shouldn't we just split it up? Well, ultimately it comes back to this isn't our idea to begin with. This is something that God is incredibly clear on. In fact, God celebrates marriage. He gives instructions about marriage. He teaches us how we can live together. He assists us in helping us find who we can actually spend our lives with. And even in spite of all this, as we talked about last week, we really often want to quit on marriage. The divorce rates that we talked about last week is 50% of first marriages end in divorce. And you would think with all that practice that we would get better at it, but no. Second marriages, 67% in divorce. Now, third time's a charm, right? Absolutely not. 74% of third marriages will end in divorce. And so when you really look at all of this, and you just kind of see the headlines on the magazines at the checkout aisle, when you listen to the advice that we get on reality television and talk shows and what we see on the internet, what we learn is marriage is not the most popular thing in the world. Now, getting married, definitely popular, but staying married is a totally different thing. But at the same time, 90% of people will be married at some point before the age of 50, which is why it just is so impressed upon us that we have to talk about this. That the day-to-day work of marriage is not popular. In fact, So much so, just listen to what people say to people who are engaged. I don't know if you were ever in one of these conversations like I was, or maybe you've heard a family member give this advice to somebody else. But what are some of the things that you hear when people are talking to engaged couples? They say things like, it's a lot of work, or you should have some fun now while you can, or you better do this before we get the little ball and chain. And when you get on their side, it's like, oh my gosh, like, is marriage really that bad? Is that awful? In fact, there might be some shades of truth in that, but what a glass half empty approach to marriage. In fact, this is a quote from a Time magazine article about marriage from just a few years back. It says, there's a reason fairy tales always end in marriage. It's because nobody wants to see what comes after. It's too grim. Meeting the right person, working through comic misunderstandings, these are the stories we're telling, even overcoming disapproval from family to get to the altar. But plodding on year after year with that same old soul, Yawnsville. Now contrast that for a second to new relationships. New relationships are fun. They're spontaneous. There's the thrill of finding out, is the other person interested? The excitement of the first date, when you hold hands for the first time, maybe getting that very first kiss. I get it. New relationships, they're fun, they're exciting. But marriage is also not that bad. In fact, here's what that same exact article went on to say. It says, studies do suggest that married people will have better sex, better health and wealth, and will probably die happier than singles with a lower likelihood of strokes, heart disease, and depression. Married people also respond better to stress and heal more quickly. Let me just recap what we just read. If you get married, you're going to have better sex, you're going to have better health, you're going to be richer, you're probably going to die happier, and frankly, you're going to die a lot later because you're not going to have all the strokes and the heart disease and all the other problems that come along. But let's not forget, Yawnsville, right? Like that is the tone that our culture has set for marriage. But what we want is we want to reframe this whole conversation. In fact, there's this great proverb that actually says this way. Proverbs 18:22 says, the man who finds a wife, he finds a treasure. And he receives it. And he receives the favor from the Lord. It's so incredible that something that was supposed to be such a good thing is now disdained, it's mocked, it's cast aside. And you might be thinking, well, Matt's just talking about the culture. No, I mean like within a movement of Jesus followers. That what we see is that when you look at people who self-identify as a Christian, the divorce rates don't change that dramatically. And so I'm not talking to those who are on the outside of the church, I'm talking to those who are on the inside. And what I want to give as advice to those of you who say, I'm a Jesus follower and I want to do this right, is a new way to live, and it is this. We need to stop fighting against our marriages and start fighting for them. In fact, it reminds me a lot of a story. In Exodus chapter 17, you have the nation of Israel. They've just been released from bondage in Egypt, and now they are walking through the wilderness on their way to the promised land. And in the middle of it, in Exodus 17:8, it says, while the people of Israel were still at Rephidim, the warriors of Amalek attacked them. For many, this is where our marriages and our relationships are. Out of nowhere, attacked. Well, kind of out of nowhere. See, attacks always feel like they're out of nowhere when you live in denial about having enemies. So when you know you have opposition, it's not a surprise that there's some conflict that comes up. So it's important for us to recognize who is our opposition in regards to our marriages. And I know you're thinking, no brainer, my spouse, right? Like it was on your mind, you're thinking it, like that is my opposition. And I get it, like what if I told you that living under the same roof as you is somebody who doesn't think like you? They don't make the same decisions that you make? You know, the Bible even acknowledges that your spouse is jacked up, like they've got some real problems. And the thing is, like, they have self-destructive tendencies. They often don't make the right decisions. They put your whole relationship in jeopardy. And the bad news is your spouse is only part of the equation. So who else is your opposition? Well, for everything wrong in your life, there's always a common denominator, and that is you, right? Like, you're equally at fault. What's even worse than your spouse is you control what you do, and you still can't get it out of your own way. And marriage is tough because you have two very imperfect people trying to make a go of it, trying to make it last. And because it's one person on this side and one person on this side, neither of you can ever actually gain the majority, right? Like, there's always going to be a split right down the middle. But that's not your only opposition. Your third opposition is the devil. And I know you might be a little weirded out by this one, but you do have an enemy in the spiritual realm. And here's the truth. The devil always opposes what God blesses. The devil wants to unone what God said should never be undone. Isn't it also ironic that he's gotten us to hate something that ultimately he broke? And so when you recognize that you have opposition in your marriage, you can better learn how to attack this and how to fight back. And you know, the hardest part is that often it feels like you can never quite get ahead, because oftentimes conflict within marriage is ubiquitous. Like, you just can't seem to get around with it. I heard the story recently. There was this couple, and one morning, the wife wakes up and she puts on that dress. That dress that she only puts on when it's a very important day. And the reason why is because she had a big meeting that afternoon. So she's standing there at the sink, she's brushing her teeth, and her husband, just, the idiot that he is like, I'm going to have some fun with this. So he goes and he starts playing with her zipper on the back of the dress. Now, she's so on edge because she's got this big meeting that she, instinctively just, spins around, and he's so caught off guard, he doesn't let go, and the entire zipper comes off, right? It breaks off of the dress. So now, here she is on the morning of a very important day. Her dress is broken. She has to go get a whole new outfit. He's just standing there like a doofus with the zipper still in his hand. They pass a few words that I can't repeat in church, and she goes to work. Now, the good news is, when she goes to work that day, the meeting goes spectacularly. In fact, it goes even better than she could have imagined. And so when she gets home that afternoon, she pulls up and she sees her husband's car and this pair of legs just sticking out from underneath the car. She only has one thing on her mind: payback. So she gets out of the car, she walks up, and she finds the only zipper visible, and she just starts playing it like an instrument. And she cannot contain herself. She thinks it's the funniest thing on the planet. She's just going to town, playing with the zipper. She lets go, she walks into the house, and who should she see in the kitchen but none other than her husband? She does not know what to do with this information. She is beside herself. She cannot form words. The only thing that she can utter as she goes completely pale white is, who's under the car? And he goes, oh, it's Greg, our neighbor. I couldn't figure it out, and he offered to help me, and so I was in here getting him a drink, and So she immediately turns around and goes walking outside, and the whole time she's just like, Greg, I'm so sorry, and Greg's not having any of it. In fact, he doesn't move at all. And to the point where it starts getting concerning, he's not moving. And so finally they get under and they pull him out, and he is knocked out cold. And the reason why is because as soon as she grabbed a zipper, he also had an instinctual moment. He tried sitting up to stop this, knocked himself out cold. She was laughing so much she couldn't console herself that she never knew. And the moral of the story is, there's always going to be conflict in marriage, right? It always going to happen. And here's the thing, conflict comes at you from all sorts of angles, whether it's finances, values, communication, fidelity. So what should our goal be within marriage? Unity. Now, although the verse I'm about to share with you is primarily written to a church dealing with divisiveness and division problems within its own church context, the principles still apply very well to us today. In fact, Ephesians 4 says this starting in verse 2. It says, always be humble and gentle. Be patient with each other, making allowance for each other's faults because of your love. Make every effort to keep yourselves united in the Spirit, binding yourselves together with peace. Unity comes on the other side of making every effort you can to keep yourself united. There's a posture that you're supposed to approach your spouse with, a posture of humility, gentleness, patience, love, allowing for the other person to have faults. I mean, this sounds really good on like the marriage card or like the marriage advice that you give, but it's really hard in the moment, isn't it? Because when that same person does the same thing over and over and over, it's so hard to maintain patience and humility and love, allowing for their faults. And in the very next chapter of Ephesians, in chapter 5, Paul would explain how this works best for husbands and for wives through mutual submission. And we talked about this last week. And I want to say this next part as a mirror, not as binoculars. Because here's what gets so difficult whenever we have these kind of relationship conversations, is that we often don't want to hold a mirror up to ourselves and say, how do I look on the other side of this? We often want to get our binoculars and look at the other person and say, are you listening? Are you paying attention? So let's all just agree right now. We're not going to listen to this and think, how does this apply to them? We're going to ask, how does it apply to me? And what we have to know is unity is going to release strength. And every application, whether it's work, sports, your job, the military, yes, even your family, unity releases strength. In fact, in Ecclesiastes, it says this. It says, a person standing alone can be attacked and defeated, but two can stand back to back and conquer, and three are even better, for a triple-braided cord is not easily broken. And this is what unity can look like within your marriage, where you have two who have become one. So you have your spouse and you have you, but then the third rope, the third strand, the third cord is your relationship with God. As the three of you work together, you're not easily broken. So what does unity look like within marriage? I can tell you what it doesn't look like. It doesn't look like complaining to your spouse or complaining to your friends about your spouse. It doesn't look like skipping on sex so that you can just look at pornography on the internet. It's not being jealous of the other person's success in life. It's not having divided finances and keeping like a running tally of who owes what. It's not sitting side by side on the couch night after night, but never actually turning and looking at each other in the face. It's not coming home and being more excited to see your kids than you are your spouse. And so often, that is what our marriages look like. It's not unified, it's still divided. All right, so going back to that story in Exodus. How did the Israelites handle it when they were attacked on all sides? It says this in verse 9 of Exodus 17. It says, Moses commanded Joshua, choose some men to go out and fight the army of Amalek for us tomorrow. Tomorrow I'm going to stand at the top of the hill holding the staff of God in my hand. So Joshua did what Moses had commanded, and he fought the army of Amalek. Meanwhile, Moses, Aaron, and Hur climbed to the top of the nearby hill. Now, I want just to see a couple things that they did not say here. They didn't just say, well, we're getting attacked. I guess this is over. It was a good run. They didn't say that. Now, they also did not say, you know, God is on our side, so we don't have to do anything. Just sit right here and watch God work. No, what he does is Moses says, I'm going up on top of the hill with this staff, and Joshua, you're going to get to work. And how do you spell a great marriage? It's W-O-R-K. It is work, work, work. Now, here's where the story gets crazy. It says in verse 11, as long as Moses held up the staff in his hand, the Israelites had the advantage. But whenever he dropped his hand, the Amalekites gained the advantage. So once again, here is my challenge to the room today. Stop fighting with each other together and start fighting for your marriage. So here is the game plan that we just learned from Moses and Joshua. Arms raised, sword drawn. Arms raised, sword drawn. Here's how this looks. Moses said, I'm getting a couple of guys, we're going on top of this mountain, and I'm going to raise up my rod. The same exact rod he used when he lifts it above his head and the Red Sea parts. It's a symbol of God's power. A little bit earlier when he's in Egypt, he uses that same rod and he dips it inside the Nile River and it turns to blood. It's a symbol of God being on their side, God working alongside them. And Joshua said, okay, great. And I'm going to do everything I can to win this battle. And this is how you unify your marriage. You do the work. You surrender to God, and you say, what can we do to make this happen? I know that we can work, but we will not work unless it has God's power. So let's talk about some techniques for how we can better fight for our marriages. I think we can all agree that, and I think we all know, that cheetahs are the fastest land animals on the planet. They also have this unhealthy obsession with cheesy corn snacks, but that's a talk for another day. So if cheetahs are the fastest animals on the planet, you ever just kind of wonder why they haven't just killed everything already? That's a huge advantage, isn't it? That they can just chase anything down. So you might also be familiar between that epic feud between cheetahs and gazelles. Once again, I'll just ask the question, why are all the gazelles eaten by this point? Well, come to find out, it's the reason why the cheetahs just don't kill all the gazelles is because cheetahs can only run until their brain hits 105 degrees. And this happens whenever they reach their top speed of 75 miles per hour. And at this point, they have two options. Option one is they can stop running and pant until their brains cool, or they can keep running and die on the spot. So gazelles, on the other hand, they can run until their body temperature reaches 109 degrees. Now, if their brain hits 105 degrees, they die just like the cheetahs, but their body temperatures can get a full 4 degrees warmer. And the way that they're able to accomplish this is every time a gazelle breathes in, God had designed their skulls to have that air pass right by the blood that's headed to their brains. And it acts as a cooling mechanism. So as they breathe air in, it cools the blood and it keeps their brain at a cooler temperature than the rest of their body. This is why cheetahs can't chase them down, because if the cheetahs can't surprise the gazelles' endurance is far greater. So why do gazelles live? Well, literally, cooler heads prevail. Now, the very first way that you're going to fight for your marriage is to keep a cool head. In the Bible, would say this is a sober mindset. It's not allowing your emotions to take over. Cooler heads will prevail when you are having an argument or a conversation with your spouse. See, when you draw your sword and you decide, I'm going to fight for my marriage, this is the posture you have to stand in. Now, I want to give you a couple more tools within keeping a cooler head that will help you in these kinds of conversations. Gary Chapman, the author of the 5 Love Languages fame, he gives these tools to us to help us combat divorce. The first one, he says this, you got to focus on the positive because negativity is a feedback loop. Now, here's the thing. The more you focus on a problem, the more critical you will become. Let's just do an experiment right now. I want everybody to take the next 10 seconds, and I want you to look around this room, and I want you to just find everything in the room that's brown, okay? Take 10 seconds starting right now. Find all the brown things in the room. Okay, everybody look back at me right now. All right, everybody looking at me? You're not looking around anymore? How many red things did you see when you were looking for brown? Virtually none of it, right? How many things that were like beige did you start calling brown because you're like, I just want to win at this. I just want to be able to spot more things. Things are like kind of really it's more black, but you're like, it might be a really dark brown, right? That's kind of what you do. And this is what happens within our marriages. This happens in our relationships. Is that when you're focused on the negative, you're only going to find the negative. If you want to find the reasons to be upset with your spouse, you're going to find the reasons to be upset with your spouse. Why? Because whatever you focus on is magnified. You find what you're looking for. Now, another one of the tools that Gary Chapman gives, I think is really good, is sometimes you need to shock your partner into seeing a different perspective. Not like literally like tase them. I mean like shock them in like the way of like do something big and dramatic. So there's a story of a frustrated wife who takes her workaholic husband to a retirement home. There's shuffleboard, there's checkers, golf course, water aerobics. You guys know the deal. And he finally looks at her and is like, why are we here? I'm not retiring for like 27 years. We don't need to be looking into this. And her response back is, well, your children and me, we want to have a relationship with you. And if we have to wait until retirement, let's speed this thing up. And it was just enough for him to be like, I didn't realize how big of a deal this was to you. And so if you're at that place where it just seems like conflict is too much and like how do you get cooler heads, you have a couple options. The first is if you mark your connection card this week, I can send you a list of marriage questions that I think will help kickstart some good conversation. Or option two is that you just need to have the hard conversation. But before you do, you need to know the rules of engagement. The first rule is you should not operate heavy machinery while you're under the influence. I mean, like literally, but also like figuratively as well. Like if your motivation is vindictive or punitive, do not act. Your goal is not to punish your spouse. It's not to deliver their comeuppance. It is simply to get the conversation. The second rule of engagement is don't tell the other person how they feel, right? Where you say like, when you did this, you were getting so much joy and like my pain. No. You don't speak to how they felt. Only speak to actions and how you felt. Don't provide all the solutions. That's the third rule. Like if you just come and say, well, we're going to do this because it's my idea, it's not going to go over well. And the fourth rule is to stay committed to the relationship regardless of how the conversation goes and communicate that. Like, this isn't going to change. And the reason why you need to dive into some of these hard conversations and talk about these things is because we want to trade predictable nearness for mind-blowing intimacy, which means that we need to reclaim the marriage bed. Tim Keller, in his book, Meaning for Marriage, he gives an interesting parallel that, honestly, I'd never thought of before. Like within Christianity, within like the church, we practice a couple different ordinances, one being baptism, the other one being the Lord's Supper. And the way that we practice it is baptism, you get baptized one time. If you've been baptized more than once, that's okay, but by and large, you get baptized one time as a public declaration, hey, I'm with Jesus now. And then, as often as we do it, we receive communion. And you do that all the time for the rest of your life as almost like this continuing proclamation, I'm a follower of Jesus. And in the meaning of marriage, Tim Keller says, within marriage, it kind of works like this. The day you get married is a lot like baptism. It is that one time where you publicly declare to everybody, this is my person. This is who I'm going to spend my life with. And we often don't see it this way, but that repeated action that lets the other person know, I am yours and yours exclusively, is the marriage bed. But the problem is, we often have no problem getting married, right? But we start allowing a bunch of other things to get between us. And so the way it works, the average marriage in America, husband and wife, they're in bed, and what's between them? Their phone, right? Like, it almost looks like that, where like the phone is right in between, or even worse, like it's this illusion that I've got to be either like super person, like I got to be a superhero, or I'm actually dreaming and fantasizing of the super person that they're not. Or, credit, debt. For some people, you didn't say till death do us part, you said till debt do us part. And finances are one of the reasons why I don't even want to touch them right now because I'm just so angry about it. Or maybe it's not that. Maybe it's things that some people would think are a good thing, like it's your hobbies. You're just like, you know what? I got to make room for what I want to do on the weekends. And so you get the boat in between or golf or I don't know what it is. Or here's one that it seems like such a good thing. You put the baby right in between the two of you. And I mean this like both proverbially as well as maybe even literally, where it's like, yeah, our baby is always in bed with us. And the thing is, like, I get it. The baby needs to be in bed for a season, but when that kid gets older, you got to get him out. I mean, there should be things happening in your bed that would haunt that child for life, okay? So, like, you need to get them out. And so what we have to do is we have to reclaim the marriage bed. And what this means is that we place each other back in the center of our marriage, where we stop trying to bring other people or other things or other issues or other things in between us, but regularly we proclaim, you're the only one for me. That it is God, it is you, and then it is everything else. There's so many books and seminars and things trying to address an issue that would be so easy if we would just say, I'm going to get all the other things out from in between us. All right, the second thing is this, and I'm actually going to need some help on this. Andre, can you come up here for a second? So here's what we learned about Moses. He goes up on top, and put this above your head, just hold it there. I'm going to talk while you do this. Just as high as you can. Moses would say, like, you got to build your life on a rock. Right? Like, here's how we fight for our marriage. Cooler heads will prevail, but we also got to build our lives on a rock. So Moses, he's up on top of the hill with his arms high. Joshua's like, hey, I'm going to keep a cool head. I'm going to be down here. I'm drawing my sword. And Moses he's up on the hill. He's like, yeah, like, my arms are raised, and we're acting this out. He's like, we see it in action as he has his arms raised. And what we see is, as long as his arms were up, what's happening? They're winning in battle. But then, when a little bit of, like, gravity starts to pull on it, right? Like, it starts to droop, it starts to get lower, until eventually they start to lose. And how long can somebody stand like this? Hours? Minutes? Yeah, there you go. And there's something that starts to take over. You're so focused on keeping your arms up and the pain of just how tired you are, that who's providing the power to begin with? This is a trick question. Who's providing the power to begin with? God is, right? So can he focus in this moment on God? No, like, he's focused on the pain. And so he has a hard time worshiping, he has a hard time praying because of just the weight of everything. And for a lot of you, this is what your marriage feels like. It feels hard because you've been putting all this effort in and it's getting tiresome. And you want to work and you want God's power, but you're so preoccupied. And so his arms would start to droop. The power below would start to diminish. And whenever that happened, it would start to lose. And so here's what Moses does. He doesn't do this alone. He brings some friends. Jordan, Joe, can I get your help? Come up here, guys. Moses said, like, I got to build my life on a rock. So, Andre, just sit down for a second. And guys, just hold that bar up for him. So he's now doing it. He's sitting there with good friends beside him, holding his arms up all day long, all day strong. He's fighting the battle because he wasn't doing it alone anymore. And this is what it looks like to build your life on the rock. Like, you need the friends around you to help you make wise decisions. You need the right support system to help you. You've got to build your life on a rock to keep your relationship from being on the rocks. This is what God wants for you, and this will make a difference. You know, there's been studies that have been done that say that when couples who attend church, pray together regularly, and talk about their marriage, they have a 35% less likely odds to get divorced. In fact, I've heard studies that say that couples that really make God the focal point of their marriage, like, it's not one person is committed and the other person's not. When both are committed, when they both pray together, when they both attend church regularly, when they talk about their faith, they are only 10% likely to divorce. I mean, that is a massive shift from 50%, isn't it? Only 10%. But there's another side of this too that I just want us to see, because maybe you're at the place right now where like, my marriage is on the rocks, and I don't know, how am I gonna do this? And you're like, I'd love to have a cooler head, but my spouse doesn't always seem to be in it. I would love to build my life on the rock, but there's just so much noise that it's just distracting. It's so hard. I want you to notice the other silhouette that we see happening here. As Joshua is down in the valley fighting, every time he looks up on the side of the hill, he sees one person with his arms stretched out with two other people on either side of him. And the picture that was present then in Exodus chapter 17 that is true for us as well is when you look in the Gospel of John, here is the description we get of Jesus being crucified. His arms are outstretched as he has two others on either side of him. And now on this side of the crucifixion, on this side of the resurrection, as you go through the battles of your life, as you look up, you can see that there is a God whose arms are stretched high for you, that he is cheering you on. He wants this to work. He is not going against you. He is fighting for you. And you could never have this power on your own, but because of his sacrifice, because of what he has done. You put in that work, but he's got his power, and suddenly something amazing can take place. All right, guys, thank you for doing this. You can go sit down. For us to win at our marriage, for us to get victory, we need to look up to that man on the hill with his arms stretched out. When you look to Jesus and make him the center of your marriage, you have a fighting chance. You try anything else, and it's only as good as the strategy, I guess. There's things that will help you, but ultimately, if you want a fail-proof one, look to Jesus. Fight for the other person. Keep a cool head. Be willing to have the hard conversation. This isn't our idea. This is something that God has gifted to us. And because of that, I think it's worth fighting for. And it's worth fighting for together. If you would, join me in prayer. God, thank you for being our advocate, for being our hope, for being our friend. God, as people within this room go through the difficulties of relationships and marriage and dating and all of those things, I'm just praying, God, that you would give us wisdom, that you would show us how we can best lean on you in really difficult battles and fights. God, I'm praying right now that for the marriage in this room that's on the rocks, the God that you would allow them to build it on the rock, the God you would save that marriage, the God that maybe future generations would be blessed because of a humility and gentleness and patience that their parents adopted even today. God, I'm praying for the marriages and the relationships that are good, that just want to get better. The God, that you'd remove all of the things that could be the seeds of division later, so that their marriage can stand the trials and the problems of life. And God, I also want to pray for the wisdom for those who desire to be married in this room who just aren't right now. The God, that you would give them a sober mind as they are picking a future spouse, that they would look for somebody who is chasing after you with the same ferocity that they are. So God, we turn this all over to you, believing that you're ultimately our hope, that you are ultimately the one that we can put our trust and our faith in. And pray this all in your Son, Jesus' name.